Lady Catherine and Lady Victoria lived side by side for years, intertwined in mutual respect and understanding. Both were mature, strong-willed, and proud of their independence. Lady Catherine held a distance from most people, her world one of controlled emotions, a fortress built from loss and sacrifice. She guarded her heart, ensuring no one could breach her walls. Lady Victoria was gentle and approachable, letting her heart guide her actions. Her affection was open, making her beloved by all. She invited warmth and love, contrasting Lady Catherine's quiet respect. Despite their differences, the two women forged a lasting bond. At the center of their lives was Henry, a servant whose loyalty to both women set him apart. Henry was no ordinary servant. Educated, cultured, and wise, his presence felt more like that of an equal. Both women trusted him implicitly, never questioning his loyalty. Henry was always there when needed, performing tasks or lending an understanding ear. His kindness and respect for both women never wavered, and a bond of mutual affection grew. Though their relationship appeared flawless, there was unspoken tension, a quiet undercurrent neither woman fully acknowledged but both sensed. Lady Catherine appreciated Henry's calm demeanor and reliability, often seeking his counsel during moments of doubt. She admired his inner strength and was drawn to him. Lady Victoria found herself drawn to Henry in a more emotional way. She felt he understood her fears and insecurities, trusting him with parts of herself hidden from the world. Both women realized their feelings for Henry were growing stronger, yet neither dared to address these emotions, fearing disruption of their delicate balance. Henry continued his work with quiet precision, providing stability both women needed. They exchanged meaningful glances, hiding true feelings beneath everyday lives. It became clear there was more to their relationship than mutual respect. Subtle gestures, lingering glances, quiet smiles did not go unnoticed. Lady Catherine realized how much she depended on Henry, not just for practical tasks but for emotional comfort. His presence had become indispensable. Lady Victoria noticed her reliance on Henry, seeking his company during solitude. She wanted to confide in him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. Neither woman confronted the feelings growing between them, fearing what it might mean for their friendship or relationship balance. The affection between the three grew, nurtured by mutual reliance on Henry. He remained steadfast in loyalty, treating both women with the same respect and care. The unspoken tension simmered beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged, a quiet force holding the three together. Henry never gave the women reason to question his commitment. Despite the growing emotional tension, his role remained clear: to serve, to help, and to remain ever faithful to the two women who had come to depend on him in ways they never acknowledged to each other. As the days passed, subtle cracks began to form in the perfect harmony that had once existed between Lady Catherine, Lady Victoria, and Henry. It started with small, almost imperceptible shifts in behavior. Lady Catherine, known for her composed nature, began to rely on Henry more than ever before. She sought him out for quiet conversations, sharing moments that felt more intimate than they ever had before. At first, it was nothing more than an occasional word of advice or a shared look of understanding, but soon it became clear that her feelings for him were deepening. Lady Victoria, on the other hand, noticed the change as well. She could sense the growing bond between Catherine and Henry, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what exactly was happening. For the first time in years, Victoria felt a twinge of jealousy. She had always been close to Henry, often confiding in him when Catherine was busy. He had been her support, someone she trusted and turned to when her thoughts overwhelmed her. But now, as Catherine seemed to draw closer to him, Victoria felt a nagging sense of loss. The closeness they once shared was slipping away, and she began to feel more isolated than ever before. One evening, when the tension had reached a boiling point, Victoria decided to confront Henry. She found him alone in the garden, the fading light of dusk settling around them. Her voice was shaky, betraying the emotions she had kept hidden for so long. She asked him bluntly, but with a hint of vulnerability, why he had been spending so much time with Catherine. Henry, ever the polite servant, tried to ease her concerns. He reassured her that he had not meant to favor one over the other. His loyalty to both women was unwavering. Yet he could see the hurt in Victoria's eyes, and he knew it wasn't solely about the time he had spent with Catherine. It was something deeper. He had unknowingly become a symbol of the emotional space between them, a silent reflection of their unspoken competition for his attention. Victoria didn't want to believe that. She couldn't. She had always thought their bond was different, something special. She had trusted him with her thoughts and emotions, and now with Catherine growing closer to him, she felt betrayed. In a moment of emotional weakness, Victoria kissed him. It wasn't planned. It was driven by a desperate need for reassurance, a sign that she mattered. Henry, startled and deeply uncomfortable, pulled away immediately. His face was a mixture of confusion and regret. He hadn't expected this, not from her. His feelings for her had always been respectful, but never romantic. He had never crossed the boundaries of their relationship. The silence between them hung thick, heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Victoria, feeling the sting of her own actions, immediately apologized. She begged him not to tell Catherine, fearing the fallout that would follow. Henry, caught in the midst of her emotional turmoil, promised nothing would change. But the damage was already done. The air between them had shifted irreparably. He would never look at her the same way again, and neither would she. Later that evening, Henry found himself alone with Catherine. She, too, had noticed the subtle changes, the quiet distance that had begun to grow between herself and Victoria. She had seen the way Victoria had looked at Henry, with something more than the usual affection, and she had felt the sting of jealousy in her own heart. Catherine's feelings for Henry had evolved beyond simple admiration. She could no longer deny it. Lady Catherine's mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions she had never expected to face. She wanted Henry more than just as a servant. She didn't know if she was in love with him, but she knew her attachment to him had deepened. Yet in that moment of quiet reflection, Catherine's thoughts were interrupted by Victoria's emotional outburst. Victoria had returned to their shared space, her eyes red from crying, her face torn with guilt. Without a word, she collapsed into the chair beside Catherine. Her voice, shaky and filled with shame, broke the silence. She confessed what had happened, her words tinged with desperation. She had kissed Henry. Victoria had hoped it would rekindle their bond, but now, seeing Catherine's reaction, she feared it was too late. Catherine, though visibly hurt, didn't speak immediately. Instead, she processed the information in silence. Her mind raced with confusion and betrayal. What did this mean for their relationship? She had always prided herself on her ability to control her emotions, but this moment tested her in ways she had never expected. She had always considered herself above such petty feelings, yet now, with Victoria's confession hanging heavily in the air, something inside her began to unravel. What had Victoria hoped to achieve with this impulsive act? Had she always felt this way, or was it merely a moment of weakness? Regardless of the answer, one thing was clear. Trust, once broken, would not easily be restored. Meanwhile, Henry was left in a delicate position. His loyalties had been torn between two women he admired deeply. He could not deny the truth of what had happened. His feelings had always been rooted in respect and gratitude, but now he faced an emotional conflict he hadn't anticipated. Both women had turned to him for more than just service. They had turned to him for emotional support, and that support had, over time, transformed into something else entirely. The days following the revelation of Victoria's kiss were filled with undeniable tension. The house, once a sanctuary of quiet respect, had become a battlefield of unspoken emotions. Both Lady Catherine and Lady Victoria, though outwardly maintaining their composure, found themselves grappling with feelings of betrayal, jealousy, and confusion. For the first time, their once harmonious relationship seemed on the verge of collapse. Henry, caught in the middle of their growing rivalry, struggled with his own emotions. The role he had always played, the loyal servant, was no longer enough to hold the fragile threads of their relationships together. Catherine, who had always kept her emotions carefully hidden, began to show a side of herself she had never shared with anyone. Not even Victoria. She had always admired Henry for his quiet strength and unwavering devotion, but now it was clear that her feelings had evolved beyond admiration. She was deeply hurt, not only by Victoria's actions, but also by the realization that Henry had unknowingly become the center of their conflict. She found herself questioning everything: her friendship with Victoria, her feelings for Henry, and the boundaries she had once held so firmly. Victoria, meanwhile, was consumed by guilt. Her heart ached as she watched Catherine retreat into herself. The distance between them grew with each passing day. She had never meant to cause such turmoil, but now that the truth was out, there was no going back. Victoria's feelings for Henry had always been more complicated than she had ever admitted, even to herself. She had trusted him, confided in him, and in a moment of weakness, crossed a line she could never undo. The kiss, though fleeting, had changed everything. Yet, despite his growing attachment, he couldn't shake the feeling that his loyalty was being tested. It was no longer just about being a servant, it was about being a confidant, a friend, and perhaps something more. But even as these feelings deepened, Henry knew that he could never truly be with either of them, not the way they wanted. He could never cross that line. His position had always been clear, and no matter how much he cared for them, he had to remain steadfast in his role. As the days turned into weeks, the emotional divide between the women deepened. Lady Catherine, though reserved, could no longer pretend that nothing had changed. Her conversations with Henry, once filled with simple exchanges of advice and concern, now felt charged with an intensity that left her uneasy. She found herself drawn to him in a way she had never been before, but at the same time, she felt betrayed by his proximity to Victoria. She couldn't help but wonder if Henry had seen something in Victoria that she herself hadn't recognized until it was too late. Victoria too began to withdraw. The guilt she felt for her actions weighed heavily on her. She could no longer look Catherine in the eye without feeling the sting of her own betrayal. She had hoped that time would heal the wound she had inflicted, but each passing day only seemed to make things worse. The more she tried to make amends, the more distant Catherine became. Victoria's heart ached as she watched the woman she had once called a friend slip away, unsure of how to reclaim what had been lost. One afternoon, as the tension reached its peak, Lady Catherine finally confronted Henry. Her voice was cold but steady as she asked him point blank what he truly felt for her. She needed to know. She needed to understand if he had ever truly cared for her, or if she had simply been another in a long line of people who had relied on him without ever truly seeing him. Henry, taken aback by the directness of her question, struggled to find the right words. He had never considered the possibility of what it would mean to be more than a servant to either of the women. He had always been there for them, offering support and guidance, but now the weight of his own emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "I care for you both," Henry said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I am your servant, nothing more." Catherine's heart clenched at his words. She wanted to believe him, to hold on to the idea that his loyalty was pure and untarnished. But deep down, she knew that something had changed. His confession, though honest, only added to the pain she felt. She couldn't help but wonder if she had misread the connection between them all along. Had he ever truly seen her as anything more than a figure of authority? Or had she simply been another part of the world he was bound to serve? Victoria overheard the conversation from a distance, and the pain of hearing Henry's words struck her like a physical blow. She had always known that their relationship with him was complicated, but hearing him deny any deeper connection with either of them left her feeling more lost than ever. It was as though their bond with him, their shared affection for him, had never truly existed, at least not in the way she had imagined. Victoria, though heartbroken, realized there was nothing more to be said. She had betrayed both herself and Catherine, and now they were all paying the price. In the days that followed, the silence between them grew. Henry remained as dedicated as ever to his duties, but the emotional distance between him and the two women could no longer be ignored. Catherine and Victoria, each in her own way, had come to terms with the fact that their bond with Henry would never be the same again. The trust that had once held them together was shattered, and nothing could fix it. Though they continued to live in the same house, the closeness they had once shared was gone, replaced by the haunting echoes of their past mistakes. The weeks that followed were filled with an air of quiet desperation. The once lively household, filled with shared moments and quiet conversations, now felt heavy and cold. The bond that had once existed between Lady Catherine, Lady Victoria, and Henry had dissolved, leaving behind only the remnants of what used to be. They moved through their days with mechanical precision, fulfilling their roles, but nothing was the same. The space between them had become unbridgeable, the weight of their actions too great to ignore. Lady Catherine, despite her outward calm, found herself in a constant state of turmoil. Her nights were sleepless, her thoughts consumed by the betrayal she felt, not just from Victoria's actions, but from the realization that her own feelings for Henry had clouded her judgment. She had allowed herself to believe in a connection that had never truly existed, or at least not in the way she had imagined. The gentle fondness she had once felt for Henry now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a sharp pang of regret. She questioned every decision she had made, every word she had said. Was it all a misunderstanding, or had they all been living in a world of delusion, clinging to a bond that was never meant to be? Victoria, too, was tormented by her own thoughts, the guilt over her kiss, over the actions that had caused such irreparable damage, gnawed at her with every passing day. She had never intended to hurt anyone, least of all Catherine, but in her desperation to hold on to the connection she had with Henry, she had betrayed both of them. The weight of her actions crushed her, and she couldn't escape the feeling that there was no way to undo what had been done. Victoria spent hours alone, reflecting on what had happened, unable to find peace. The bond she had once shared with Catherine felt like a distant memory, and the connection with Henry had become an impossible dream, slipping further and further from her grasp. Henry, though ever dedicated to his duties, found himself at a crossroads. He had always prided himself on being a loyal servant, but now the lines between duty and personal emotion had blurred beyond recognition. His feelings for both women had grown deeper than he had ever intended, but he could never openly acknowledge them. He had been the quiet observer, the confidant, but now he felt like an outsider in his own life. His loyalty to both women was unwavering, but it came with a cost. He couldn't help but wonder if he had been the catalyst for the rift between them, even though he had never sought it. The affection they had both shown him had been genuine, but now he realized that he had inadvertently become the wedge that drove them apart. The trust they had once placed in him was shattered. As the days stretched on, Catherine and Victoria found themselves in an uncomfortable silence whenever they crossed paths. Their once effortless conversations were now stilted, filled with a tension that neither could ignore. Catherine, though deeply hurt, had grown resigned to the fact that their relationship was beyond repair. She could no longer look at Victoria without feeling the sting of betrayal. She had never imagined that their bond would end like this, and the reality of it left her numb. She had wanted to believe that there was still hope, but each day brought new reminders that trust, once broken, could never truly be restored. Victoria, for her part, had become a shadow of the woman she once was. She no longer found joy in the things that had once brought her happiness. She had always been the one who wore her heart on her sleeve, but now she felt as though her heart had been ripped from her chest. Victoria couldn't escape the guilt, the shame, and the endless regret. She had lost Catherine's trust, and with it, a part of herself she had cherished. She had loved Catherine truly, and the thought that she had destroyed that love with one impulsive act consumed her. Victoria's days were filled with an overwhelming sense of loss, and she had no idea how to move forward from the wreckage of what had been. One evening, as the weight of their unspoken feelings grew too heavy to bear, Catherine made a decision. She could no longer live in this suffocating silence. She needed closure, needed to understand if there was any chance, no matter how slim, of salvaging what they had lost. She sought out Victoria, her heart heavy with the burden of what she was about to say. It was not an easy conversation, and neither woman was prepared for the rawness of the emotions that would come to the surface, but they both knew it had to happen. They sat across from each other, the years of shared history now feeling like a distant memory. Catherine's voice, though steady, trembled as she spoke. She acknowledged the pain they had both caused, but also the love they had once shared. There were no easy answers, no simple way to fix what had been broken. But in that moment, Catherine allowed herself to feel the loss, not just of Henry, but of everything that had come before. She could no longer ignore the fact that some things were irreparable. Victoria, her eyes filled with tears, listened silently. She had never imagined it would come to this, that her actions would cause such devastation. She had hoped naively that time would heal the wounds, that perhaps they could return to the way things had once been. But as she looked into Catherine's eyes, she saw the truth in her words. It was over. The love they had shared, the trust they had built, was gone, and no amount of regret could bring it back. For a long time, neither woman spoke. The silence between them was deafening, but in it, there was an understanding. They both knew they had reached the end of a chapter they could never revisit. The love they had once shared was gone, and they were left to pick up the pieces of their broken lives. Though their paths would never cross in the same way again, they both realized they had been changed. Meanwhile, Henry continued to serve them, though he now knew that nothing would ever be the same. The love and loyalty he had once given freely were now shadowed by the pain of what had been lost. As he looked at the two women, he saw only the remnants of the bond that had once united them. And though he knew that they would never truly heal, he couldn't help but wonder if there was still a chance for him to find peace.